Hello, today is Friday, June 26th, and welcome to episode 612 of Fault Line, to the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We've got a squad of NSI senior fellows today, including myself, Jessica Jones, and we're joined also by Algene, John Lipsey, and Andrew Boreen. Both Boreen and I are rocking some NSI fleeces, so if you're watching us there, we're twinsing it up. Okay, today we are talking about Turkey, and not just because we lost to them. Team USA lost to them last night in the World Cup in the last 20 seconds. And just not great. That's okay. We're still moving forward. We're still moving to the next round. I know everyone's dying to talk about the World Cup, but actually, there's some other stuff we've got to talk about when it comes to Turkey. It's been in the headlines recently. There have been some stories that the Trump administration may appear interested in finding a way to revive major defense sales to Turkey, potentially including engines, maybe even F-35s. We've talked a little bit here on the show. Of course, Turkey is in NATO. It's one of the alliance's largest militaries. It's one of our greatest partners. It sits between Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East. But it's also been a challenging partner for the United States. One of the biggest flashpoints was Turkey's purchase of Russia's S-400 air defense system, which kind of kicked off the U.S. removing Turkey from the F-35 program to begin with. And so we've now come potentially full circle. But because NATO is more than just Turkey, we also could talk about, we had NATO Mark Rutte visiting President Trump, visiting congressional lawmakers, making a pitch for NATO. We've got the NATO Summit next month, actually, in Turkey again. So there's a lot to talk about. So Algene, I'm going to turn first to you. What do you make of the news? What might congressional lawmakers also make of the story about the potential defense sales to Turkey?
Well, I think that we've seen bipartisan opposition to these sales. I'm really just glad to see that Congress is actually, both parties are actually speaking out about this. They're saying, wait a minute, not so fast. We actually have a say in this. This isn't just about one deal, it's about the rule of law, right? Who gets to legally make these decisions? Here's the real core problem. In 2019, Congress bought the Russian-made, or Turkey bought the Russian-made S-400 air defense system. Because of this, Congress passed a law. And basically, the law kicks Turkey out of the F-35 program and imposes sanctions. So that's the law is still on the books. That law is still law. Turkey still has those missiles. Defense experts confirmed that up to 200 Russian missiles are sitting in Turkish warehouses right now. And the administration has not certified to Congress that Turkey is in compliance with the law. Not in writing, not at all. And yet they're still moving forward with this sale. So this is not just a legal problem, actually, it's a security problem. These are advanced General Electric jet engines. Turkey's defenses are integrated with Russian missile systems. So if sensitive US technology ends up operating alongside Russian hardware, Moscow gets a window into America's capabilities on that front. So as one lawmaker put it, the F-35 is a technology platform that Russia would love to really get its hands on, so really get that information. And so we can't allow that to happen. That same logic applies here, right, to these sales. So let's just be clear about who we're rewarding here, or who the administration would be rewarding. Turkey is the only NATO member that has not sanctioned Russia over Ukraine. Erdogan has sheltered Hamas leadership. He's threatened our allies in Greece and Cyprus. And he's really maintained cozy relations with Putin. And so we're handing this advanced military technology to a leader who's repeatedly acted against US interests. So what makes it even worse, I think, really is just how it was done. For months, the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Greg Meeks, requested briefings on the sale. The State Department ignored every single briefing request. I can't tell you, having served both on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, how rare it is for the administration to do that, to just completely ignore a briefing request. There was no emergency justification. There was no written rationale, nothing. according to members of Congress. So that is really just shocking, actually. They just basically told Congress, we're just moving forward. These engines won't even be delivered for years. So really there's no urgency in this. This is just a deliberate choice to treat congressional oversight as simply an inconvenience to me. And this is a bipartisan issue. As I said before, both Republicans and Democrats alike have been raising the alarm. The law is really clear. Congress must act. And if the administration continues down this path, I think you'll see members of Congress introduce a joint resolution of disapproval to block the sale.
Okay, thanks, Algene. So, John, Algene raised some points, some challenges that the U.S.-Turkey relationship has had, not including last night's defeat of our own soccer team in the, huge World Cup. So, John, what do can you tell us a little more about just the relationship in general, where what does the potential major defense sales mean to that relationship into the future? Just give us your thoughts, gee whiz whisperer.
One thing I'm not concerned about is the U.S. loss last night to Turkey. That was the B team. Actually, I think it's good to feel a little pain, a little, up the urgency level for the team, the squad going into the elimination round here of the World Cup. So, not concerned.
Give the Turks a little ego up.
Yeah, I mean,
make them feel good about themselves.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very complicated relationship with Turkey. It always has been. It will be for any foreseeable horizon. But I do think there have been some meaningful shifts back by Erdogan, by Turkey, back in the direction of NATO, back in the direction of sort of the West and Europe, and away from Russia, who they were playing footsie with for a bit there when. Most prominently when they acquired the S-400 system. Basically what happened in Turkey is they had an economic catastrophe several years ago, and in no small part fueled by President Erdogan, who had a magical thought that that actually high interest rates drive inflation rather than help to tamp down economic activity and lower inflation. And so he was lowering interest rates into a hyperinflation economy and making it worse. And so anyway, when he was reelected in 2023, brings in a new finance minister, he goes on a tour, says we're going to go back to basics. And along with that, you had obviously the Russia Assad fall and Russia kicked out of Syria. So a number of things sort of combined to where Turkey started to kind of re-embrace the West for reasons of for changes in security in the region, but also changes to their economic situation where they just needed to make fundamental change and reintegrate and look for a way out. So some of the things that they've done that kind of might give the president some reassurance of the trajectory they're on. They did ultimately take action against, in line with U.S. sanctions around Russia, with cutting off relationship with Russian banks and payment networks, and trying to restrict exports of semiconductors and other types of components that had kind of skyrocketed following the war with Ukraine. They did ultimately approve the ascension of Finland and Sweden into NATO. They are supportive of Ukraine joining NATO. They have pivoted energy imports from Russia somewhat to the U.S. LNG and others. So there have been some actual meaningful, real shifts and changes that have occurred. To clarify something, I don't believe the S-400 that they've actually ever put it into use and integrated it with their missile defense or NATO's missile defense systems. The U.S. and Europe did bring their missile defense capabilities to bear to protect NATO from Iranian attack during the latest conflict. I believe Germany is putting Patriots into Turkey. and the like. So there is, and then I think there's a big monetary incentive for Turkey to try to take advantage of this big European defense buildup. So there's a lot going on where there's increased integration, and then with them hosting the NATO summit, it's not at all surprising that the administration would be looking to sort of further strengthen that partnership and incentivize them and further incentivize that reintegration. Now, that all should be done with very clear eyes. They are not a perfect actor. They are not perfectly aligned with the U.S. interests and foreign policy and the like. But there have been some meaningful shifts. The other thing, just to maybe flag, is the Turkey and Israel relationship is once again flaring up quite significantly. And I think that that's largely driven by the conflict within Syria and Israel and Turkey having very sort of different interests there. Lebanon is obviously an exacerbant, but then also Israel's apparent plan to have the Kurds storm into Iran to try to overthrow the regime appears to have caused Erdogan to pick up the red phone and call President Trump, who's now taking credit for keeping Turkey out of the war on the side of Iran by telling the Israelis that we're not going for this Kurdish plan. So anyway, it's messy. They're an imperfect ally, but it's also a country that is kind of at the center of these different security interests and security regions of the world that pivot around in and around Turkey. They are a major player in the region, and it's a country that the U.S. has a strong national security interest in, as much as possible, keeping within the fold, within NATO, within a broader security alliance. But it will be very interesting to see what comes from Ankara.
How is Professor John Lipsey with Turkey 101? Continue to listen to Fault Lines for more. Okay, Maureen, I want to turn to you. You just hosted an event and moderated an event for NSI on NATO itself. We just, the alliance has been a major topic of conversation on the Hill with the administration, with the future of the alliance may look like. What do you think about this week's developments? What are you looking for as we look towards the NATO summit in a month?
First off, we need to use maps. Like, one of my greatest peeves is when we talk about foreign policy or national security or military issues and don't look at maps. It drives me bananas. And here's why. Turkey owns the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. They are the sole owner of traffic in and out of the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. So I just want to start there, because if we were all looking at a map, the Byzantine nature of the complexities of NATO, of the frenemy relationship with Turkey, become abundantly clear. Why does Russia seek to sell things to Turkey at the same time Turkey is really worried about what happens on its border with Syria and Iraq and where the Kurds are, right? So I just think that geography really matters when we talk about these issues. And a lot of times we get this abstraction where we talk about foreign policy, and especially if people aren't, I don't know, I've seen these surveys. They show Americans don't know where things are on a map. I don't know if I believe them or not, but let's assume that that's true. Right?
I think you can believe them.
Okay, so if we can believe that, I think, for me personally, I actually keep a Mercator projection on my desk so that I always can kind of look at it and recognize, oh, when we're talking about Ghana, this matters because it's located here. So I think Turkey, let's remember thousands of years of human history, a Byzantine Empire, an Eastern Holy Roman Empire, Constantinople, right? No longer, now Istanbul. I think that stuff has to be taken into account when we talk about Turkey and how critical Turkey is as a NATO alliance member, right? I do not think any of the other 31 member states of NATO ever care to see Turkey go neutral, or, in the 1980s, you think about what if Turkey had been Warsaw Pact, right? That would be cataclysmic existential risk to Europe. And it would be, again, just because of the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. And So I think that's really critical. I think it's great. And at the event we hosted 2 days ago with some Senate and House staffers on Capitol Hill, I just want to flag a couple things that came up during that conversation. We had 4 deputy chiefs of mission. One of them was Greece. And as we know, Greece and Turkey have some historic tensions, and particularly with regard to Eastern Med. But what was clear, and I think Turkey is unique within NATO, right? Turkey is not only European. NATO exists for the collective defense of Europe. Turkey is hybrid. It is European, it is Middle Eastern, and it is Asian, right? So Turkey's got to, I think we need to be really sensitive to the fact that for the collective defense of Europe, which has always been 75 years of why NATO exists, right? We have to look at that southeastern flank. We have to look at those 2 straits. And we need to be sensitive to the fact that like Turkey probably has to cut some really awkward deals sometimes. And so I think that's kind of a thing. The other thing would be a theme came up. Representative Turner, who was Republican, made it very clear that there is big bipartisan support for NATO as an entity for collective defense as the longest standing, most powerful alliance in American history. Obviously, there's no question that the minority interests in the House and Senate are, saying, hey, America needs to stay engaged with NATO. We see a lot of conversation around that. I think one of the observations I took away is that there is a great deal of also majority interest in preserving the alliance, strengthening the alliance. And one of the bumper stickers that one of the deputy chiefs of mission said was, a new bumper sticker is a stronger Europe for a stronger NATO. And I actually liked that because I think that probably will resonate with administration officials who have kind of seen some public commentary. Oh, we don't like NATO. We don't like European nations kind of, sucking off the American teat and whatever other kind of throwaway offensive slogans they throw out. But a stronger Europe with more European defense-centric, organic defense industrial base military capacity will actually strengthen the entire alliance. And right now, let's keep in mind, Turkey has the 2nd largest military in the alliance. If Europe stands up bigger standing militaries, has more organic missile capability, you talked about Patriot batteries, right? And then I think what happens is we start to see a strategic shift that Turkey recognizes, wow, let's see how those SA-400s performed in Iran when America went to war with Iran, right? Versus Patriot batteries and how those perform against Soviet or Chinese systems. And so I think that then it kind of becomes let's use the competitive nature of performance of the systems. NATO has a better product, Turkey. You should buy NATO interoperable air defense so that you don't end up looking like Iraq or Iran, right? And so I think that probably there are economic drivers, and it aligns to the core principles of the alliance. Defend Europe. Keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out. And I think that Turkey is, I welcome it. 22 years was the last time there was a NATO summit in Turkey. And I think there's a lot of room for hope that there is big American support for the alliance, but it does require Europe to centralize, get interoperable, and really heavily invest in its own defense. And Turkey's going to come along for the ride if that all works out, I think.
Jess, why am I Professor Lipsy? Andrew's got maps. He's talking about the Byzantine Empire.
Don't you worry,
what
Lipsy.
Are we doing
I was going to say Professor Boreen just covered geography. Don't. We've got a lot of professors on the horn.
All these
here,
briefings,
okay?
we see them on the Hill. You give them to senator, and it's like, here's a bunch of words with no map. And you're
I'm gonna get you a pocket map. Like people like
to say like the pocket constitution.
The pocket constitution, yeah,
it's an atlas, just ready to go.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
Fault Lines listeners, if you stay loyal, you might also get a pocket atlas. All right. Just before, there's also, just as everyone wants to know, the next U.S. World Cup game is next Wednesday night. We play Bosnia-Herzegovina. Please let us win. Okay, that's a wrap. We're on to the weekend. Thanks so much to Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, June 29th for another episode of Fault Lines, NSI's amazing podcast that gets you smart fast. We're on YouTube. Check us out there. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.